Hello, everyone. It's Jennie and Laurie of AstroPath, and we're here today to talk about the incredibly powerful Scorpio full moon eclipse that's happening on May 5th. We are really late making this video, aren't we, Jennie?
Yeah, but I think it's part of the message of the eclipse.
I think so too. That's kind of
Yeah.
exactly what I was going to get to with that is,
Yeah.
and the fact that Mercury is retrograde, whatever. We planned to do this some days ago. We didn't get around to it, but here we are now. Now, before we get into the topic at hand, I want to remind you that both Jennie and I do teaching, mentoring, and consultations. You can find Jennie at hiddenpathastrology.com. You can find me at astrolore.org. You can also please subscribe, like, comment on our videos. Another thing I want to tell you before we jump in is that we have started making a series of videos about how to work with transits for those of you that are learning and studying astrology and want to know more about how transits work to your personal charts. We started making that series and we've made 3 of them. There's a few more to come. They kind of accidentally got published. We had planned on waiting, but they're up there. So go check those out as well. Now, is there anything else we want to say before we blast into the eclipse?
No, I think we should get right on into it. I think you've
All right.
covered that. Thank you for bringing those
Good.
things up.
Good. Okay. So tell me about this eclipse, Jennie.
Oh my. Well, let's see. We are basically in the midpoint of Taurus season. So because the moon is in Scorpio, it means the sun is in Taurus. Because anytime you have a full moon, they're in opposite signs. So normally at a full moon, what we're looking at is, let's back up a little bit. At the new moon, that was the start of the cycle. And that was when you planted the seed in the soil, some sort of Taurus seed. At the beginning of that. Actually, it was an Aries seed, but you'll have to watch the video for that. Anyway, then a week later, you have the first quarter moon. And a week after that, you have the full moon, which is kind of like the flowering phase, and usually is the culmination of whatever seed you planted. However, because we're in eclipses, it subtly shifts the focus, and we'll explain a little bit more about that in a second. Just to finish the moon cycle thing, in another week we'll have the last quarter phase, and then we'll move back into the next new moon. So that's just it in a nutshell. So we're at that full moon and eclipse phase. So yeah, what do you think about an eclipse, Laurie? What pops into your mind? Run screaming from the room.
It's kind of interesting. Eclipses are, they always happen at new moons and full moons. They come in pairs. We usually have about 4 of them a year. This series of eclipses that have been in the signs of Taurus and Scorpio, this has been going on for what, 18 months?
Yeah, since November 2021 was the first time we had an eclipse to do with the Taurus Scorpio axis.
Okay. So you can really think of this one. This is the last eclipse that is happening in Scorpio. So this is really a culmination. We've got one more eclipse that will have the sun in Taurus, but we're done with Scorpio after this one. Mm-hmm. So I really think of this one as the culmination of what's been going on for the last 18 months. And I realize as I'm talking about that, I didn't really answer your question, did I? You said, what do you think of eclipses? And I guess what I really want to say to answer that is eclipses are really wild cards, and they're not like a normal new moon. Normally during a new moon you plant a seed, and like you said, at the full moon there's the culmination of that seed. Well, at the eclipses, it's like time stretches out and everything happens, is very karmic and has a longer term impact, and we can't really determine it. I think that's the biggest difference. At a regular new moon, we make an intention and plant a seed, and then at the full moon we celebrate that. Well, it's not like that with eclipses. These are real karmic points. And it's so interesting to me that this eclipse is happening at 1450 something, I think, of Scorpio Taurus. So it's basically 15 degrees. it's right at the midpoint of one of the fixed signs. And the fixed signs, the midpoint of the fixed sign is a critical, always considered a critical degree. So these are really, this is a very, very powerful eclipse.
Yeah. And I think just think about it logically, or when you think about it logically, you think about this idea that the light of whichever luminary we're talking about is occluded. So at a lunar eclipse, you get that kind of reddish, shadowy moon because the shadow of the earth is being cast on the moon. So what it represents is just this, it's kind of like a totally different light bulb has been put in. And I was thinking about those cheesy like black light posters, you know, with like the fuzzy bits, and then when you turn out the light, there's something different emerges. So it's kind of like that with a lunar eclipse. Like it's this opportunity to see things under a different light that you can't normally see. And in Scorpio, I just can't help but think we are talking about deep inner emotional workings, you know, those difficult corners of our emotions that we tend to want to, I don't know, skip or ignore. But the message is that underneath that, it really controls your behavior. Like those dark little corners that you've ignored, if you don't pay attention to them, it starts to control your behavior. And Scorpio kind of has that reputation for being controlling. So it's just, but I always like to start with the idea of thinking about the astronomy of this kind of occluded light and what that can suggest. And because we're talking, as Laurie, as you've mentioned, about a longer cycle here, these eclipses are pivot points that last for months. I think that there's something to that as well. Like it might also be something that you do now that seems totally innocuous. And in a few months, like, oh my God, you're at a totally different place because it turned out to be a big pivot point. So that's some of the stuff I think about with eclipses too. So yeah.
The other thing I want to mention about eclipses is the last time we had these Taurus Scorpio eclipses was 19 years ago. The eclipses are a 19-year cycle. So if you think back, what, 2004, I think? I think that's right.
That seems like good math.
19 years ago. So you think back 19 years ago, you can maybe get some clue of how this is progressing over time as well. So think of 19 years ago, 2004. Think of 20, what was it? You said November 2021. So those are a few periods of time that can give you some understanding of where we are now as well.
Yeah. And you're reminding me that on April 20th, we had the new moon in Aries that was the solar eclipse. That is the corresponding eclipse for this lunar eclipse we're having on the 5th. So if you remember, for those of you who haven't, you can go back and watch our video, but that eclipse happened at the very, very, very last degree of Aries, right before the sun went into Taurus. So it's an interesting shift time. What it does too is it lets you know that Mars is an important player because Mars rules Aries and Mars also rules Scorpio. So it's important to look at the activity of Mars. And in both cases, Mars has been in Cancer. It kind of brings in this other watery component. Cancer's a bit of the matriarch. And a sort of a nourishing, self-caring energy. So it's kind of interesting to think about. This is a very watery lunar eclipse, you know, because of that. So it's
very,
yeah,
deeply, deeply emotional.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this and your emotions are all worked up, don't be surprised. So is everybody else.
Yeah, totally. I know if you feel like you're in turmoil, you're in the right place. So
yeah.
And one other date I want to throw at you is October 25th was the new moon in Scorpio. So this is 2022, October 25th. If you're using the 6-month cycle, that corresponds to this full moon in Scorpio. So I think we've gotten most of the dates out of the way.
The only other thing I want to mention is, and we'll be looking at that when we look at the charts, you know, Uranus is highly activated in this as well. 4 days after this eclipse, the sun and Uranus conjunct. So there's some, you know, don't make the mistake of believing that on the day after the eclipse, if nothing's occurred, you're in the clear. You know, this stretches time out. And particularly with that, I think that Uranus and Sun conjunction 4 days later is going to be a really interesting point that's going to correspond with what's going on with you personally and in the world here. So I wanted to throw that out as well.
Yeah, and I'm glad you threw that in now too, because it's important to understand that with Uranus and Taurus, I think since 2018, these eclipses on the Taurus Scorpio axis have extra potency. They're extra potentially disruptive, but they also are extra possibility for awakening to something new and being able to witness it, accept it, go with it more. So it's just an interesting time, and it's the resistance to the reality of what is that causes the most amount of pain and problem. So what we're all trying to do as human beings is to kind of witness what's going on within ourselves and see what's going on in the world and be able to stand and witness it and be with it. That's one of the questions. Is not an easy task, but that's definitely part of it. So
yeah, and I think, you know, always remembering that Uranus is, you know, the thing people always say about Uranus is expect the unexpected. And there's that again, don't think you know. You know, there's going to be a lot of anxiety or feelings building up in the area of your chart where this is occurring. And it's easy to think we know where it's taking us. You know, we might think we know, but Uranus is very well known for bringing in all kinds of unexpected surprises for good. And, you know, don't anticipate it being something horrible. I want to say that as well. A lot of people get all nervous and scared about this stuff. And I think about way back in the day, people would see eclipses and, oh my God, the king's going to die or whatever. You know, it's always, there's the tendency, we tend to expect bad, but try not to do that. You know, even if something difficult happens during this eclipse season, one of the other things that I was thinking about when I was looking at the chart, and actually I'm going to, if I can wake my mouse up. Okay, here we go. I'm going to open that chart. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, no, I think that'd be very helpful.
Okay, so what I wanted to mention here is we can see that the Uranus and Sun are conjunct up here. But another thing I want to point out is that Saturn is, I mean, it's a little distance, but whoops, that's not what I wanted. By sign, Saturn is trining that. It's trining the Scorpio at any rate. And to me, what that's saying to me is just this unexpected change is ultimately supporting us. Or what comes out of this change is ultimately supporting us. What do you see when you look at this?
Well, I was going to say that part of the, if people are going, well, what am I supposed to do with this, you know, this kind of energy coming our way, or however you want to look at it. And I just keep coming back to, on a very simple level, the answer is to find your inner ground. So this means, this is very simple, like, you know, the things that help you personally, internally feel stable. I know for me, it's like, go for that walk in the woods if I'm feeling agitated. It might be curling up with my book on my sofa. That's a very Taurus-y thing, right? So I just want to make that comment that go to simplicity, those simple little tips and tricks that help you personally feel calm when things feel wild. Because that kind of in a big level, that's actually what's being asked of us, is having to find inner ground. So I wanted to make that comment. And
thank you, Jenny.
Yeah,
I mean, on a personal level, it feels so good to hear you say that. It's like, oh yes, that's exactly what I need.
Yeah, I mean, especially with Mercury retrograde, and we're in the middle of Taurus season, and so on and so forth. But I like that you brought in Saturn in this trine configuration, because Saturn always brings stability. I mean, you know, sometimes it's too much, but in this case, I think it's very welcome to have Saturn stabilizing the emotional stuff, because the other piece is on the other end is that there's also a loose trine to Mars,
Right.
also in Cancer. So what we have essentially is this trine loose, but this kind of grand trine in water, with the outlet being Taurus. So really, this is such a statement around get your feet on the ground and accept the fact that change is inevitable. It's kind of that. All right, we can end the video now.
Yeah, and accept the fact that you're going to have really powerful feelings about it.
Yeah.
Embracing your feelings, not running away from them. Embrace them while you get your feet on the ground. Go out and dig in your garden, go for a walk in the woods, take off your shoes and get your feet on the earth and cry your eyes out if you want to. Whatever, allow those feelings to come up because they're real. And part of this is engaging with that and allowing yourself to welcome the change that's coming. You can't, we can't control change. We can't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think there's such an important piece about acceptance too with the Scorpio moon, the lunar eclipse and the Scorpio moon. It's kind of like, you might be able to see with that slightly occluded light, I don't know, maybe some parts of yourself that aren't so pleasant or pretty. I mean, the parts of yourself that are maybe needy or dependent or clingy or very defensive, or combative. And part of it is just like, hey, you know what? This is part of being human. So there's this piece around, okay, that's not so pretty, but you just work with the acceptance and work with the idea of, like, as Laurie, as you're saying, like, go out in the garden, cry in your garden, do something where you can actually release the emotions. The idea is to not get stuck in them, but be able to see them, experience them, let them go. I mean, this is really this underneath all of it, the sort of simple message about the actual Scorpio part of it. And I think that's probably what we're going to talk about when we get to the individual impacts. Those components.
I think the one other thing I want to say is most of you that are listening to this probably have your chart. If you have personal planets right around the mid degrees of the fixed signs, you can anticipate this is going to really shift things in a bigger way than for the general population.
Oh, dang it, Laurie.
What did you say?
I said, dang it, Laurie.
Dang it, is right. I've got more planets at the mid degrees of fixed signs than I can believe. So, and at any rate, the fixed signs are, what are they, Jenny?
Well, they're fixed. No, they are Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius. Those are the 4 ones we're thinking about.
So look for mid-degree personal planets, mid degrees. If you've got outer planets there, that's a whole nother conversation. It's not personal. But if you've got the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter and Saturn to some extent, but mostly those first ones, if they're near that mid degree, you're going to be really feeling this.
Yeah. And okay. I mean, that whole fixed thing too, I mean, it's part of why it's hard, because fixed signs don't like to be jostled. They want to keep doing what they're doing at all costs. And so that's also adds to the flavor. But the nice thing about them is they can be constant. They can be steady. They can find ground. They can get centered. They have a lot of capability to do that. So that's part of it.
Yeah. And if you're looking at those planets in your chart and seeing that you've got powerful personal planets right in that mid degree of the fixed signs, look for where Saturn is as well and find your places where you can use Saturn's energy to help stabilize also. Because Saturn's trining those planets, basically. It's getting, it's building toward that.
Yeah, it's certainly at least a sign-based aspect, yes, which counts. So,
yeah. So okay, wherever Pisces is in your chart is going to bring some stability.
Yeah, that's helpful. Okay, I mean, we could keep going, but I think we're probably ready to talk about individual impacts, don't you think?
I think so too. And we've got the visuals all up here and ready to go. Do you want to do the annotating? I realized I jumped right in and started doing it.
Oh, sorry. Somebody in here has an Aries moon.
I don't know who.
No, it's all good. Okay, well
Okay,
let's carry on. And
let's
yes,
carry on. Let's go to those of you. If I can move this thing. Huh. What's going on here? What's going on? It doesn't want to behave. Oh, it will now, I think. Huh. No. Oh, I know what I have to do. Hang on, folks. Thank you for your patience while I figure out what I'm doing here. Okay. Whoops. There you are. Okay. For those of you with Aries rising, what are we going to be thinking about here? Where is the eclipse itself is happening in your 8th house? This is an area where you're probably already feeling some anxiety and stress. What would anxiety and stress in the 8th house be about, Jenny?
It's probably going to be about other people's stuff. It's other people's values, other people's money, other people's possessions, other people's emotions. And the whole 8th house thing it's so much about being able to work with other people's stuff. So it requires that you know quite a bit about yourself. So there's an introspection piece, because you need to know where you end and other people begin. And so the Scorpio lunar eclipse here is really bringing into question what behavior or coping mechanism or what have you is getting in your way that you need to release. What is the thing? And this could be old baggage. This could be something more recent in a moment that you recognize, depending what personal planets you have here. But I think that that's the message of the lunar eclipse part of this. So
this is this is a challenge between your own values and other people's values, right? Between your own money and other people's money, between what's yours and what's theirs.
Yeah.
So there's some way in which there's some change going to occur in how you are navigating other people's stuff.
Yeah. Yes. And part of it requires that you look at how you value yourself, because that's where the Taurus 2nd house thing comes in. And with Uranus there has been some new things come to light, new things coming into, what that you're questioning about the way you value yourself. It also might be that there's been disruptions or changes in your finances, and that is about your finances, but almost always leads right to your self-worth as well. They're intimately connected. So that's where the focus has been. This Taurus season has been bringing that up into a further clear picture with the sun there. So that's what this whole thing is about for you with Aries rising.
Yeah, I think the unexpected message is something about your boundaries. There's something about your boundaries that something might come to light and really show you that your boundaries aren't what you think they were, or some issue in there. And it's so easy to fall into the language of a regular full moon,
Right.
But this is just keep your eyes open.
Yeah.
Celebrate what you see. The whole issue of celebration with a full moon, I think we can keep that part of the full moon even during an eclipse, but what we're celebrating might be very different than what we would have expected it to be. It may be celebrating something that we don't initially think is a pretty picture, but again, go out in the garden or in the woods and have your feelings.
Yeah, and I think just what you just mentioned, because it's a lunar eclipse, I do think this is a longer term thing. This isn't just that fleeting, oh, I don't like how I behaved the other day. This is a little bit more like, no, what deeper change do you feel that you need to make? I think it brings in a longer, slower, deeper level or layer, which is challenging in the 8th house. And use ritual to your advantage.
Yes.
That's what I would say. Do something ritualistic that allows you to figure out how to set those boundaries. So,
and allow yourself to really see the change in you that comes from the change in the boundaries you set.
Yeah.
You know, that polarity is very interesting. Okay, we're going to
Yes.
move on now to those of you with boy, this thing moves fast. Whoops. Oh. Taurus rising. Okay, so what feelings are you having about your partnership? Bottom line, what are the deep, intense feelings that you're having around your partner? You know, with this eclipse being the release of something, letting go of something, I think people have to be really careful of that. And, you know, if there's stuff going on, you're having big, intense feelings about your partnership, it would be easy to think, oh my God, I've got to just boot the person out the door because this is a time of letting go and release. Well, if that's what needs to happen, guess what? That person will be gone. You don't have to do anything. If what you really have to let go of is your own approach to relationship, that will also be made clear to you. So I think it's really important that we not fixate on what we have to do. We don't have to do anything. We just have to observe what's going on around us and allow ourselves to have the feelings. And for you, you're having deep feelings about your relationship in regard to the changes that are happening inside yourself.
Yeah, I think that's really great that you highlighted that in such a good way, Lori, because I do think there's some mistakes around, well, I don't like the way this is going, so I just need to chop, chop, chop on the external level. But, you know, even if that is true, there is always an internal mirror, an internal picture. But I think that the lunar eclipse in Scorpio, again, is very much alluding to those inner patterns that we don't maybe normally can't even see very well because it's Scorpio, but there's something about that lunar eclipse that's showing the pattern in a new relief, in a new view, so you can see it in a way you haven't before. I think I mean, it might be that you need to shed your suspicions about something, you
Oh, I
know.
like that.
I mean, it really is, thank you. It really is that inner look. And then also the other end of this thing, you have had Taurus filled with a Uranus for a long time in your first house. So there is some major changes going on for you with Taurus rising. There's something big that has shifted in the past few years. This Taurus season with the sun coming to join Uranus is really shining a bright light into whatever that is. So as the ground has changed beneath your feet in terms of your personality, how you present yourself, the way you choose to develop yourself is now showing up in the opposite area of life through that lunar eclipse in your partnerships. So this is an interesting lunar eclipse for those of you with Taurus rising.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And, you know, with Scorpio in your seventh house, relationships always have a flavor of deep, powerful emotional intensity for you anyway. So you got a lot of deep feelings around relationship anyway. Right now, it's amped way up.
Yeah.
Don't take any big actions. Watch what's going on. Pay attention. Go out in the garden. Go out in the woods.
Yeah.
Ground yourself and cry if you need to.
Yeah, extra important for Taurus rising to just do those nice, simple, helpful, comforting things to help navigate this turmoil. So cool.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on. Let's see if I can advance it just one this time. Oh, there we go.
Voila.
Gemini.
Yeah. Well, let's see. So the lunar eclipse is falling in your sixth house if you have Gemini rising. Really bringing up the idea of your routines, your practices, the way that you exercise, the way that you eat, the way you get yourself to work, the schedules and structures that keep everything sort of organized. So I think the lunar eclipse might be raising some questions of, you kind of need to look at it. Like, you could be overdoing it. You could be someone who has a really vigorous exercise routine, or you're really, really stringent about all the things that you do, you know, and maybe for you, it's time to back off. On the other hand, you could be someone who's kind of like, I'm just gonna flow through whatever I feel like doing. And maybe for you, it's important to start thinking about how can you better support your health? What practices could help you? So you're really kind of looking at these two possible ends, and there's maybe some other ones in there, but the big question is around routines and practices.
Yeah, there's some anxiety, some big, like what is the shift that you're expecting? And, it's going to be something different than that. But there's some anxiety here around how you are spending your day-to-day energies. There's
Yeah.
some big anxiety there. So keep an eye on it. If there is anything to do, which there really isn't, but if there was anything to do, it would be just, making sure you've gotten your checkups or, whatever. Make sure you are taking care of your health. I mean, that's always important. But this anxiety is showing up in that area of health. Maybe you've had a powerful meditation practice and you've kind of lost it recently. Well, it's okay. It'll come back if it's time for it to come back. Something will occur that pushes you back onto the cushion or back into your a better manner of eating or taking care of your health.
Yeah.
And what has, the link there between the 6th and the 12th house is what's going on under the surface. What's the big wake up in your unconscious thinking that is driving this sense of anxiety around how you're doing on that day-to-day routine? Those two, the polarities are so important to understand. So there's something in the unconscious mind that's driving this anxiety around your health.
Yeah, it is interesting. And polarities are, they're pretty fascinating because I think having Uranus in that 12th house, like that is a suggestion that there's something disruptive happening beyond your conscious awareness, and you might get glimpses of it, like it might kind of emerge and go back down. But there's something fundamental shifting in the way that you feel connected to, well, really, it's the cosmos, the universe, these much bigger things in ourselves, or you could just say the rest of the planet, whatever works for you. But there's something shifting about your fundamental attitude. And it's like the ground is kind of shifting beneath your feet in terms of how you think about those things. And with the sun there too, this is just shining a bright light, just this particular Taurus season, shining a really bright light into your subconscious patterns and behaviors and things that are linked to whatever your ideas are about the bigger picture. So it's an interesting time. And with the lunar eclipse there too, it's there's some question around like what's driving, as Laurie, you mentioned the anxiety, what's driving the anxiety? What's hidden beneath the surface? What are the motives? When you go, let's say, exercise, what are the motives for your exercise in that moment? What's happening? So these are introspective questions, but this is what Scorpio brings up. And if you have Scorpio in the 6th house anyway, there's some depth already existing in how you handle your routines as it is. So this is a chance to kind of get to poke at it in a different way. Take a look, be introspective about what is driving you. And then just work with that idea of acceptance and releasing.
Yeah. I mean, it's in that area of your day-to-day routines that you've got big feelings around it. And another thing I would say is, if during this period of time, someone invites you to an exercise class or a meditation group or, something that would shift those routines, be open to that. Be open to messages from the universe around developing something different in that area going forward.
Yeah, well said.
Okay, let's move on to those of you with Cancer rising. I think I know a few people that have this.
Ooh.
So let's see. The eclipse itself is happening in the 5th house. What is the anxiety? Oh, that's so interesting. The anxiety around how you have fun and how that connects with your community. What's your experience of this, Jenny? Or is that too personal a question?
No, it's good. It's good. It's interesting the way you're phrasing it. I was like, everything's fine. Well, that 5th house, I remember talking about this the other day. The 5th house is so much about how you give of yourself. And so there's a question here about how you give of yourself. And I mean that giving of love, when you just love someone or something that you're doing and you are willing to pour yourself into it. that kind of love, you know? So there's a question here about how you're doing that, what you think that means, you know, and then asking yourself, well, what's my motive? You know, what's beneath that? Not that it's bad, but just simply understanding that Scorpio moon is really focusing on like these deep needs and how they need to be met. So it's important for you to kind of question that, like what is motivating you when you're expressing that love, and allowing yourself to examine it, and then work with the whole idea of acceptance and releasing. I mean, that's what I think about the eclipse part of it. So interesting time to get to see something different, perhaps about your behavior that you weren't quite aware of.
Yeah. So there's,
Yeah.
and yeah, with that eclipse there in the fifth house, there's some anxiety building during this time around giving love, around having fun. The fifth house is about having fun. So paying attention to how having fun is also connected to the community that supports you. Where's the anxiety building there? And what is your expectation of that? Do you think that, yeah, something's going to blow up in your community and you're going to suddenly be all alone with no place to give of yourself? Or, you know, what is that expectation? And really allowing yourself to be open to it being something very different than that.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
maybe you could all of a sudden, and I'm going to just say something totally silly here, but, you know, maybe all of a sudden you could find yourself out in a field flying a kite, and you can build a whole community event around that, you know, and really just allowing this flow between those two areas over the course of this coming period of time. Because you're, you know, with Uranus having been in your 11th house for quite some time now, there's a lot shifting and changing. That ground of the community that supports you has not been stable for some time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yet you continue to give of yourself to receive that. And where's the shift going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
It's going to happen, and it's going to happen in a big way over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, well, I just think that with Uranus in the 11th house, as you're saying, there's been some big shifts in the community for a few years now. And perhaps you've been moving, and I kind of think of it like an earthquake, like the ground moving beneath your feet, and you go to pick up your foot and set it down, and whoop, you're now on a different piece of ground because the ground literally moved beneath you. And I have a very strong memory of a big earthquake in California many, many years ago and having that happen. So there is a real kind of jolting, whoa, what's happening? And with the sun coming in there as well, the sun's shining this bright light on what's really happening. And what it's suggesting, I think, is that, you know, it's okay to seek a new community. You know, it's okay to follow, you know, what does feel good to you about whatever's happening in your fifth house, and build community around that, you know. And if it's not what you thought it was going to be, you thought it was supposed to be this other thing, so what? You know, this is the time to sort of shed. There's always a shedding to do with Scorpio moons, and allow something new to come in. That's
I
really what
love that. I love how you just said all that. I mean, you think about someone with Cancer rising, there's such a loyalty. And I can imagine someone with this setup having that loyalty toward their community. And yet this really is like, there's a necessity to give your love in a different way, give of yourself in a different way, or to a different community, to support a different community. That's really interesting. I like that.
Yeah.
Huh,
I gotta
great.
go now. I got work to do. Anyway, so all right. Well, that was very illuminating. So we move on.
Okay, let's move on then to those of you with Leo. And this puts the emphasis. Oops, I meant move to Virgo. I'm in a hurry
Look
to
at
get
that
past
snappy
Leo.
little
Yes.
mouse you've got. So quick, quick, quick.
Boom, boom, boom. Yeah, my mouse is like way too sensitive. I just got this new mouse and I don't know how to adjust. So I'm like,
Right.
At any rate, if you have Leo rising or Leo sun, this will work to some extent for that as well. And this puts the focus of this eclipse in your 4th house of home and family. So what's the anxiety there? Is it related? First of all, I would say, think about, is it related to your actual home where you hang your hat at the end of the night? Or is it related to family members? Is it related in some way to ancestry? There's something around home and family where there's some anxiety and you feel like there's a shift about to happen.
Yeah. One of the other things of the 4th house too is it could be extremely internal. I mean, this could be the foundation of your personality, because the 4th house kind of represents the integration of your personality as you step into your adulthood and so on. So there's also there's a very private internal focus that could be here too. So I think you're right, Laurie, like kind of ascertaining for yourself, which level are you working at with the 4th house here? You're right, because it could be like renovations on your home that you're super frustrated with, which is very external. But the question is always going to be about what is your internal, as you've been saying, sort of anxiety or hang up or issue or concern behavior to do with where this lunar eclipse is falling, to do with your home life.
You've got an awful lot of feelings around it.
Yeah.
If your house is being renovated in the middle of Mercury retrograde, you're probably out in that garden crying.
I know. And the interesting part, so the juxtaposition here of the polarity is that you've had Uranus up there in your 10th house for quite a few years now. So there's been a big shift in your career and your profession, and the way that you're working with that. And then with the sun coming in for this Taurus season, it's really shining a light on that. Like, what is happening? What has shifted in your career? What new thing do you want to start? What new approach do you want to work with? So the two things are really tied together. And that's why, I mean, in a way, it's easier to think of the lunar eclipse as being that more internal emotional security that you create for yourself, because you need that in your workplace, you know, and there's such a juxtaposition between the external and the internal with this particular setup.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like, you know, don't quit your job to run home and take care of things at home. Don't avoid your home to run and do all these big changes out in the outer world. You got to, you know, be really available to see how those two are impacting each other. The impact between your career and the big changes that have been going on in your career, and then the deep emotional kind of turmoil that this period of time is bringing up. It's really going to, they impact each other. So watch how that is working in your life and allow it to bring up those deep feelings around your home or ancestry, or just that, you know, when you talk about the 4th house as just like the base core of who you are. It's like, you know, I think of that. I mean, what is the base core of who you are? It's your, you know, it comes from your ancestry and from your early home life. That's where the core of you lives. And yeah, that 4th house is so important and so kind of mysterious in a lot of ways, especially with Scorpio there. You've got big, deep, intense feelings in the core of who you are and toward your ancestry and your family and the home you ultimately live in.
Yeah, and this might, it's kind of it might come as a surprise, because Leo rising is so like, hey, like so external and celebratory, and you know, you're kind of perhaps up there in center stage in certain times of your life, and then meanwhile you've got Scorpio in the 4th house. Like, that's fairly bottomless, you know, and it might come as a surprise to even yourself, but certainly to other people, because they're going to get hit with that Leo first, which is an interesting juxtaposition again. And I think one of the key things maybe about working with this lunar eclipse for you is go ahead and find that sense of comfort and stability in your workplace. Like, that's what's gonna, like, I would say, don't be afraid to not run away, but to like bury yourself a little bit in work in a good way. Like, you know, sink into it. If that's available to you, that might be some way of helping you. This is not to avoid the feelings, but simply to give you a stance, a place to put your feet while that's going on. So it could be really helpful.
Yeah, allow that stability to support the deep, powerful changes that are occurring
Yeah,
down
exactly.
at the bottom there, because
Yeah,
that's where the shift is real. Yeah. I mean, the shift
yeah,
is happening in a bunch of places, quite honestly.
yeah. I know. You
Uh,
got it. Yeah.
yeah.
Good.
I mean, I just thinking about that Uranus conjuncting the sun and the sun ruling the ascendant. There's a lot going on here for those of you with Leo rising. There's a lot of big things happening.
Yeah.
So, are we ready to move on?
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about those of you with Virgo rising.
Oh.
Oh,
Yeah.
Virgo rising. All right.
Well,
So, how do you communicate? That's the question.
yeah.
What is the difficulty in using your voice to really speak of your worldview, your greater understanding of the world? What's the challenge?
Yeah. I know this is I was just that is a deep place for your voice. I mean, I think sometimes this might be a little bit overlooked. Like there really are some deep ideas that need to be conveyed through your speaking and work, through your communication to other people. And I mean, that's kind of a interesting thing to think about just by itself, because in some ways the third house is just kind of like, oh, it's your communication. But really, communication is everything. I mean, communication is how you interact with the entire world, you know? And then when you throw in the whole idea that Uranus has been up there in your ninth house of your worldview, which is kind of where you have all these different experiences. I mean, there's some profound shifts coming, going on in the way that in your belief system, in the way that you view the world, in the way that you receive any sort of higher education or wisdom. I mean, there's some big shift happening with that. And then yet here's that lunar eclipse being like, hey, let's just talk about these really, really deep issues.
Right. And
Right?
we've got deep feelings about how we express ourselves,
Mm,
what's spoken about,
mhm.
what's said.
Yeah.
That
And yeah.
it's really interesting.
So bear in mind too, this is all forms of expression. So this is your writing, this is how you're speaking. This also can be to some degree like how you move through the world, like the way your mode of even transporting yourself. I mean, there's a lot here. There's a lot of levels in the Scorpio here. It's a real depth. There's always the case of siblings. Like what's going on with your siblings? Is there an anxiety about sibling issues,
Or your
unknown,
neighbors.
yeah, our neighbor, right. The other one can be neighbors, which is funny because neighbors, I think, is such a weird relationship because you're kind of thrown in next door to some people and you're sharing space, and it's very often a sort of contentious place. It's
I've
kind of
got stories.
fun. I bet you do. So I don't know. There's some real themes here around yeah, communication, learning, education, all those kinds of I don't know, places of shifting mindsets.
Yeah, so pay attention to what's opening in front of you in terms of speaking what you believe. I
Mhm.
also think, I just want to point out I think of the third house and the sixth house as being related in that we always talk about the sixth house as the day-to-day routines that support our health. The third house is the day-to-day routines of the mind.
Mm.
Just, as you're going about your business, what is the rumination? And I think with Scorpio there, rumination is the word. It's like
Yeah.
the deep rumination is what the day-to-day mind does. So there's some anxiety in that, or some shift happening in there. So is there a conversation that has to be had with your neighbor or with your sibling or with somebody else about your changing worldview? Not but don't think, well, now because this eclipse is happening here, I have to speak up. The opportunity will arise.
Mm.
You don't have to do anything. Don't plan anything. Just watch, see how it comes out. see
Yeah. That's
see
so
what
true.
happens and allow yourself to have all the feelings you have.
Yeah, this is a really good opportunity to just kind of witness how you communicate. It's a
Mhm.
little bit with the introspection of Scorpio. It's like, can you step outside yourself a little bit and watch the motives behind certain communications? Like, and this is We were talking earlier about this being like a narrow path to walk through, a narrow path of where you're not being, let's say, too harsh with something that you're saying, but you're also willing to speak up and say, because there's a little bit of an introversion with Scorpio here, but that there's something about those two kind of bookends, if you will. But
fascinating.
anyway.
Awesome. Awesome. I love it. Okay, we're going to move on now to Libra.
Oh, Libra.
So if you've got Libra rising, this puts the eclipse itself into the second house. So there is some sort of a culmination and some anxiety around money, resources, self-worth. That's where the shift is really highlighted.
Yeah. Yeah, this is gosh, I think with Libra rising, you're very kind of social. You come across social and quick and chatty and, maybe keeping it light. But boy, you get to that second house where Scorpio is, and it seems to me that there's a high possibility of some deep-rooted self-worth challenges. Because Scorpio, gosh, it just goes to those deep, deep layers. And it's not always the easiest. Like it kind of brings in maybe some emotional baggage and things like that into the second house of self-worth. Also very important place to consider is your relationship with money. Your relationship with money can often just reveal some of those deeper layers. There's certainly an interplay between money and self-worth. So with the Scorpio eclipse here, I guess I like how, Laurie, you've been saying, what's the anxiety? What is the deep-rooted anxiety here that is affecting the way that you value yourself? I mean, that's the fundamental question. So this is not a very, it's a pretty tough placement, I think, for Libra rising. And then especially when you throw in the 8th house, because you've got Uranus cruising through your 8th house. It's been there since 2018. So there's a real disruption to the way that you've historically managed other people's baggage, possessions, values, all those kinds of things getting thrown at you. And now with the sun in there too, there's just sort of an inescapable light being shown into how you deal with other people's, quite frankly, bullshit, so there's a question here around boundaries. And this is I see this as being fairly disruptive and tumultuous. Possibly.
Yeah. And don't try to control it. Keep yourself open. Allow yourself to have all the feelings you have. I imagine this for some reason, what comes to mind as I'm looking at this is someone who has really deep feelings about their own resources as opposed to someone else's resources. And, I mean, we all know how challenging it can be with, relationships and money. For a great example, people have all kinds of feelings like, I don't have any money, you have tons of money, or you don't have anything, I've got it. There's this dance that people do around finances and how that reflects their self-worth. It's like, I don't like anybody that has money, or I don't like anybody that's poor. People do all kinds of stuff around that. And there's something in here about really understanding, not trying, I'm not even sure where I'm going with this, but there's some deep feelings that you may have around what you have and what other people have that really, really needs to be shifted. So keeping yourself open to how would that?
Yeah.
Oh,
I like where you're going with it, Laurie.
I'm not quite finding my ground in this conversation.
No, I think you brought up some really, really good points. I think the question might be with the Scorpio moon in the second house, this lunar eclipse, I think the question might be, are you somebody who tends to denigrate yourself and, oh, everybody else is better than me, I'm not that great? Well, that'd be one end. The other end of it would be like, I'm awesome. I am super deep and so reliable and awesome. And I don't know what other people got going on, but I'm the shit. Those would be the two ends of the spectrum, right? And I think that and both of those are a skewed way of seeing the world. And so I think what's being asked of you in this light, in this occluded light of the lunar eclipse, is how do you find the sweet spot between, how do you thread the needle between those two things where you recognize your own self-worth and you're, you know, you support yourself, you're willing to stand your ground, but you're also willing to be open to other people. You're also willing to watch other people and accept that they have baggage too. You know, so you're trying to find that sweet spot. And I keep thinking of with this lunar eclipse, there is this needle that needs to be thread, the precipice that needs to be narrow. There's a narrow path, you know, between this sort of precipice. And so the answer is just to tread carefully and not go too crazy in any one direction, but just to kind of
and allow the change that is just opening in your understanding of you versus others. You know, this is the culmination. It's a karmic thing. You know, eclipses are a karmic change that gets set in motion. So if there's something there, just pay attention, allow yourself to have all the feelings you have about this situation of where it's your values versus their values. Allow yourself to have all those feelings because it's shifting. It's allowing you to open up more of an acceptance and an understanding of where you meet others.
Yes. This is, you know, accept the feelings, feel the feelings, release the feelings. And how do we do that? By finding a sense of ground internally in this very simple, gentle way with yourself.
Yep. Go out, take a walk in the woods, take your shoes off, go dig in the garden. Okay, we're going to move on to those of you with Scorpio rising, and boy, it gets personal here, doesn't it? If you've got Scorpio rising, this is really a culmination, a karmic culmination in some way of how you present yourself in the world. And because it's an eclipse and not a full moon, you know, at a full moon, you'd be celebrating, rah, here I am. But this is a different thing of paying attention to how others do see you. And really, you're going to get an idea, you're going to get a view in a very different way, I think, of how you present yourself in the world.
Yeah. I mean, anybody with Scorpio rising, like you're going to be somebody who tends to like to seek out deeper experiences. You know, you like to kind of get into the nitty gritty. You want to understand what makes things tick. Like you want to have this sort of this detective investigative mode with Scorpio rising. And so it's really bringing attention to how do you walk in the world? How do you show up in the world? And this lunar eclipse is kind of giving you an opportunity to look a little bit differently into your behaviors, to tune into anxieties or maybe things you're not so happy about, and just look at them, you know, look at them, see what comes up. And as we've kind of been saying, it's like this idea of accepting who you are, accept how you walk in the world, feel the feelings, and then release them. I mean, this is what we're sort of tasked with, and it's not so much an active thing as a sit back and witness and introspect and allow to unfold.
Yeah, it's so interesting because, you know, one of the things with Scorpio wants to control things. You know, there's a real controlling the narrative with Scorpio. And with Scorpio rising, the idea of controlling how other people see us can be really strong with that Scorpio rising. And this is really, with an eclipse, you don't have that control. But what you can do is exactly what you said, stand back and observe. How do people see me? And there's, you know, with the opposition to the seventh house, your partners, the other people in your life can mirror that back to you. So just simply standing in it and really allowing a partner or a partnership to reflect that back to you, to mirror that back to you. You know, Uranus has been moving through your seventh house for some years now. And relationships, how you manage relationships, how you understand yourself in relationship has probably gone through some rocky changes over these last few years. And now allowing those changes and the relationships as they are now to reflect back to you how you're showing up in the world is going to enable some shifts. It's going to present you with some shifting dynamics in how the world sees you.
Yeah, and it's nice with that sun being in the seventh house just for this Taurus season too, and it's coming up to join Uranus, so you're starting a new cycle, or they are starting a new cycle that has to do with awakening and illumination. And I just think that something really cool could come to light about the way that your relationship has changed. I mean, it isn't necessarily a disruptive, I mean, it certainly could manifest as some sort of breakup, but that's not necessarily the case. It could be a new level, a new layer in a relationship you've been in a while, that could bring in some I don't know, something fresh and exciting as well. So I just want to encourage, not thinking it being any one direction. Your job is to kind of sit back and examine, where is it going, and what is unfolding here, what is the change, and what light is being shown into my relationship now that's showing something different. And it could be a very pivotal time in an important relationship in a really positive way as well. It's just interesting to think about. So think about what it is for you.
Yep. Okay.
All right.
Let's move on to those of you with Sagittarius rising. So wow, that's putting this Scorpio lunar eclipse right in your 12th house of your unconscious. So boy, those of you with Sagittarius rising, your deep unconscious is so powerful, so deep. I guess deep unconscious, deep, yes. There's such an intense depth within you that others don't see. Sagittarius rising shows up as the explorer, the fun-loving person, but there's still waters run deep, so to speak. So there's something in that area that is really in the process of powerful, unexpected, and change that very karmic change.
I think this is an interesting placement because I feel like it's so deep, it might be, you may not be very aware of certain parts of this. And I imagine this lunar eclipse rattling around in your 12th house, might bring something up that you just had no idea. I mean, I just allow you to see into something that you just hadn't seen before. That could be rather liberating, to kind of liberate whatever that thing is that's rattling around. Just let it out, let it go. It's something that is like you said, deep going in there. But in the meantime, what might help ground you, bring you back down to earth, is going to be that Taurus situation in your 6th house. I mean, there has been a lot of change in your routines since especially 2018. There may be something totally different about your life that's forced you to do something different. It could be something to do with health. It could be something to do with, anything that shifts routines. There's a lot of different scenarios you could go to, but nonetheless, there's some change here. And then with the sun in that 6th house as well, it's just really shedding an extra, or shining an extra light on all of those things. So I think the task here is just make sure that you really go into that grounding space. I mean, I would say that you need to do that anyway with Taurus in your 6th house, period. But now is a time to really let your routine support you on a profound level.
While you allow yourself to really be aware of that deep, there's something happening in your unconscious, and it's going to be difficult to see it, but you know it by the fact that there's incredibly deep feelings bubbling up. You can't not feel that in the middle of this eclipse, that bubbling up. You've got to allow yourself to feel those feelings, and yes, find the ground in that changeable area. It's so interesting finding ground in the area where Uranus is,
I
because
know.
it's ground and it's shifting ground.
Yeah. But it's also, I just sometimes I get into the whole, like when you go outside and you stand on a patch of dirt, it like on one level, it's like big deal. You're standing on the ground on a patch of dirt. But on another hand, you're standing on a planet, in the middle of a solar system. I mean, so and they both are true in the same instance. And so there's something about that Uranus asking all of us to do that, to stand on that patch of ground and kind of go, wow, this is part of this much bigger system. And just let that hold you, in an interesting way. I think that there's something about that for all of us that's being asked.
As you were
Yeah.
saying that about standing on a planet,
Yeah.
I was listening to a podcast or something the other day, and they were talking about some star that ate planets.
Oh my God. There you go.
They were saying ultimately our star will eat Mercury and Venus and maybe us. It was just a really interesting perspective that planets change over time as well.
Yeah,
This
well, no, this
totally
is a good 12th house topic. The last thing I want to add to this is just I've been also been reading a book, a really interesting book by Malcolm Gladwell lately, and it talks about the idea of these ideas or these intuitions to just emerge out of our unconscious, and it's called the adaptive unconscious. And there's a huge propensity for just inventive problem solving that you never even knew existed, that just pops up. You use the word bubble, that like bubbles up out of your unconscious, and oh my gosh, something just arrived like full and like a complete solution to something. So it's kind of that in the 12th house. So
I,
so take a step back, take a look,
I
sit with
love
it.
that you brought that up. And I think that guy who wrote that book probably has some major planets in the 12th house.
Yeah.
Because anyone with planets in the 12th house, that experience of knowing what you don't know, or
Yeah.
things bubbling up, it's part of life if you've got planets in that 12th house.
Yeah. And
It's
it's surrender and trust that helps you work with it. I mean that it's that. So a lot going on. It's hard to explain that 12th house, but I think
yeah.
hopefully we
I
said a lot that makes sense to you, Sagittarius rising.
Yes, I bet we did. Okay, so we're going to move on now to those of you with Capricorn rising. And this puts the Scorpio full moon lunar eclipse in your 11th house of community, and where you receive love and support from like-minded others.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Just that. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, this is definitely bringing to light some way that you, I don't know, some behavior or emotional stuff that maybe gets in your way of receiving love in your community. And it's time to kind of look at that in the eye and see what it is, and and accept it and feel it and release it. I mean, there's something about that to do with community. It might be some way of being a community that you've done for a long time, and it's just time to cut the ties with that particular part of your past.
Hmm.
It's that sort of thing we're looking at with the lunar eclipse in your 11th house.
Yeah, and once again, it may be time to cut ties, and yet those ties are going to be cut. Because it's an eclipse, it's not something for you to do. It's something for you to keep your eyes open and see what's shifting. Possibly a whole new community will open up to you.
Yeah.
Possibly something will occur that you just have no real choice. The community dissolves and goes away. Perhaps you don't know what community even means at this moment, but there's some anxiety in this area. There's something that needs to be explored. Some cosmic culmination around how you receive from the greater world.
Yeah, and I've been thinking too, when I was writing my blog about this, I was thinking about the idea of these sort of two ends. Like on one hand, you could be very defensive and not let anybody in because it feels too vulnerable. And on the other hand, you could be very, I don't know, I guess offensive. I mean, there's also the other end of it. So I don't know. I think thinking about how, what is your behavior in groups? Like, how are you letting people in is really going to be a big question here. Another end of it would be, are you very, very dependent on a community for how you feel? So those are sort of these two, I think of those as the kind of two outside benchmarks, and you're trying to aim for the middle where you're open to other people, but you're not dependent on your community for everything you need, and to really question, is the community, is it supportive of you? Is it not? And being, like you said, Laurie, allowing whatever's going to happen there, let it happen.
And I think it's really interesting for people with Capricorn rising, Capricorn's a very strong, stoic sign. And with Scorpio there, it's interesting to have Scorpio in the 11th house, because Scorpio, again, there's that control aspect of Scorpio. Scorpio wants to be in control. That's how it feels safe.
Right.
And yet, so you think of, if someone is trying to be in control in community, that's kind of a twisted way of working with the 11th house, because the 11th house is who supports you, not who you support.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying there?
Yeah.
So really allowing yourself to feel those deep feelings and be supported.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's an eclipse, so you're not doing anything. You're watching the patterns. What is occurring in this area of your life? What's opening up? And in, looking at the 5th house here, there's a lot for the last few years since Uranus stepped in there in 2018? Is that right?
Yeah.
So since 2018, how you give of yourself has changed a great deal. And how you give of yourself really determines the kind of community you can be engaged in.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, depending on what your personal planets are and so on and so forth, like, it's very possible you being engaged in some sort of process that, of change to do with how you give of yourself. And now it's kind of, this lunar eclipse is being like, all right, let's test this against your community. It's kind of this inflection point. And especially, again, with the sun is illuminating whatever's going on in that 5th house too at this particular moment of time. So it's a good kind of important point to step back and ask these deep questions about the giving and receiving of love, of a longer process. And because it's an eclipse, we've been in this, it really honed in on it since 2021. So what have you been doing differently since 2021? There's a lot of layers here, but that's the fundamental question to the giving and receiving of love.
So open your mind, feel the feelings,
Yeah,
and see what changes are occurring in that area, how you give and how you receive.
mm-hmm.
Okay, ready?
Yeah.
We're going to move on now to those of you with Aquarius rising. And this puts the eclipse itself in your 10th house of career and reputation.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an area of karmic culmination.
Like, there's a little bit of tongue twister. Yeah, I mean, the lunar eclipse in your 10th house. I mean, what is that bringing up? I guess this is maybe bringing up your, what is your emotional relationship with your work? And what are some things that maybe are bringing in some turmoil and making you feel not okay with something that's going on with work? I mean, that's kind of what it's bringing your attention to. So that's the first question to ask yourself with Aquarius rising is, what's happening at work? Is there some emotional turmoil here? And then what do I need to look at? What's the real cause or the motive, if you will, of my own turmoil? Like, what's happening there? It's a very internal process. This is not so much about, blaming or pointing the finger at all these external things, but rather, what is your approach in your professional life and what might need to shift?
What is going to shift?
Yeah, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, whether you like it or not, there's something shifting in that area of your career. And it may be, you probably have some ideas of how it's going to play out. because you're probably feeling that anxiety in that area. And you might think, oh my God, I'm going to get fired, or oh my God, I'm so upset about this, I'm going to just walk out the door. But again, you don't know how it's going to play out. Some shift is happening there.
Yeah.
And don't think you have the answer. Just keep your eyes open, allow yourself to understand that whatever it is that's happening in that area of your career or your reputation is very closely connected to what's happening in your deep internal parts of yourself, your home, your family. There's a lot of change that has gone on over the last few years in the area of home, family, your own internal depths. Some big change in there that is really impacting your career. And that's, it's in that polarity where this big shift that's coming is bubbling through. So keep your eyes open. If a new job offer comes in, pay close attention to it. Just keep an eye on what the big shifts are bringing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that fourth house where Uranus has been since 2018. I mean, it brings in a question around the stability of your roots. How are you feeling about your roots? And of course, this could be very external, like, oh, you've moved in the last few years and you're still kind of grappling with your new home. How do you feel? Do you feel grounded? Are you feeling nourished and grounded in your new home? Could be some things like that. But in any case, no matter what, it's working with how you feel inside yourself, like your own sense of inner ground, like how you feel at the roots of your personality is really, when you really get into the internal workings of it, that's the part of the change that's happening in the fourth house. And now this lunar eclipse is this inflection point of what's the ripple effect being on your work, like in this moment in time during Taurus season. And so that's what to watch for. And I always just think, as unpleasant as tumultuous emotions can be, they're just signposts. I mean, not to be belittled or ignored, but they're just signposts to be read, to be felt, and then you carry on, and you carry, it's coming with you to a degree. Release what you can, but it changes you, and that's what we're doing. I mean, there's a transformational potential with Scorpio in your 10th house that has carried you throughout your life. So this is an inflection point of all those things.
Yes, that 10th house for you, it goes through major transformations at different times in your life, wherever Scorpio is. So you've got a lot of deep feelings there. When you come home from work at the end of the day, go out in the garden.
Yeah.
Go dig in the garden. You're going to really need that as things are shifting and changing here over the coming months. Okay, so I'm going to move now to those of you with Pisces. Whoops. Oh, where were we?
No, the sign changed.
Where are we supposed to be?
We're right here. It just says for Aquarius, but we are actually on the Pisces page.
Oh,
yeah.
Uh-oh, that's terrible. Sorry, everybody with Pisces rising. I made a mistake. Please forgive us. So we're talking about Pisces, even though it says Aquarius.
Yeah.
So those of you with Pisces rising, this really threw me. Sorry, I didn't catch it.
No, sorry.
The big change, the big shift during this lunar eclipse is happening in your 9th house, which is your worldview. How you understand the bigger world. The 9th house really brings in issues of education and travel and other cultures, ways in which we learn new ways of understanding the bigger world picture.
Yeah, there's some sort of shift happening in the way that you view things, that's for sure. I always with Pisces rising, I mean, that's a fairly emotional sign anyway to have on your rising sign. And now you're working with Scorpio, which is bringing in that emotional content as well. So there's something about, I don't know, maybe it's the turmoil you feel in your worldview as you look out and see what's going on in this crazy world of ours. It would be very easy to feel triggered right now. But I also think that we're trying to really focus this in on the internal level. Like, what is the internal source of your wisdom? Like, what is the internal emotional content that has to do with the way that you look at the world? Because that's what you're kind of being asked to work with. So if you feel turmoil, take a step back, allow yourself to examine it, be introspective, and then accept what you're feeling and allow the feeling to actually happen, feel the feelings, and then move on from there. I mean, that's kind of what we're doing with this lunar eclipse.
Yeah, I think, this really suggests to me that the kind of culmination, the karmic change that's coming is really going to come through some big new understanding, whether you develop that understanding through education or travel or religion. For God's sake, you might change your religion. There could be all kinds of ways that this comes out. And with the Sun and Uranus in your third house, you need to be really paying attention to the changes in your day-to-day thought processes over the last few years and how that is really supporting these big changes in the outer world.
Yeah. Yeah. I see the Uranus in your third house. Yeah, that absolutely. Dramatic change in your thought processes, or, and how you take in information from the world. I mean, it's there's a big shift here. So that's the first thing to think about too, is like, what has changed for you since 2018? What are you doing differently? And then with the Sun joining Uranus in your third house and starting a whole new cycle, it's really shining a light on what some of those shifts are. So I think that's an important thing to consider. And then what are the emotions that are tied in with that is what the lunar eclipse is bringing up. I mean, in a very simple way, the third house is like how you listen, and the ninth house is as you're talking. It's kind of like this. I don't know. There's a little bit of a back and forth between the areas of life, these two areas of life, like that.
Yeah, it's an interesting polarity. I think of the third house is where we kind of gather information, and the ninth house is where we bring it forth into the world. Too, you
Yeah.
can think of the third house as writing, and the ninth house is publishing, or understanding
Yeah.
and then bringing it forward. But there's a big change there. You want to just keep your eyes open. If somebody invites you on a world cruise, go.
Yeah. The other thing that might be helpful to think about that just came to my mind is the third house is kind of like elementary and middle school, where you're sitting in the classroom and the adult teachers at the top telling you what to do. And then the ninth house is more like when you go off to college and you're much more in charge of your education. You push back on that teacher more, and you have more opinions, and you have a longer beliefs, a belief system that's been going on for a lot longer of your life. So it's I find it helpful. Like the ninth house is more complexity to it and has to do with experiences. So it's like, how are the experiences in your life bringing up different emotions for you? And then what at this lunar eclipse, is showing up in some way about your emotions that you're not so sure about, or maybe it's showing a side of yourself. You're like, ooh, like that's not a very critical thinking side. That's kind of I'm following along with some dogma side. So these are some of the questions you want to look at. Is there a dependence on other people's belief system, or is there a defensiveness around being willing to take in experiences from other people? So those are some of the questions you might ask yourself with the lunar eclipse in your ninth house.
Yeah, the changes that this eclipse are bringing to you with Pisces rising are in the manner of your worldview and how you communicate. That's the area. So expect big changes in how you think and what you're thinking about, and allow yourself to have deep feelings about these changes, because we can get, especially with Scorpio there, you can get very attached to a particular worldview, particular idea of the world. And when that changes, that can be very, very, very disorienting.
Yeah.
So allow yourself to have whatever deep feelings you have, and just watch how it works.
Be willing to learn. I think the 3rd and 9th house is so much about like just be willing to learn. It's just that you're going to have to deal with the emotional that comes up, and then once you get past that, then you can be open to learning, right? So,
and once again, I apologize to those of you with Pisces rising. I see that I made 2 mistakes. It not only says for Aquarius, but this little Taurus symbol is supposed to be here.
that's all right.
Oh well, mistakes happen, and I think we're done. Are we done?
Yeah, I think we're all finished up. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay, thank you all for watching, and we'll do this again soon.
Sounds good. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Laurie.
Thanks, Jenny.